Kings wield swords. Popes wield souls. But what happens when the two collide? Welcome to medieval Europe's ultimate authority showdown. Hello, and welcome to Impactful Moments, where we explore some of the most, you guessed it, impactful moments in human history. In this video, we'll explore the Investiture Controversy, a dramatic struggle that decided who truly held power in medieval Europe. As is often the case with major medieval European developments, this story begins in the shadow of Rome, its collapse, and the vast ripple effects that followed. When the Western Roman Empire fell in 476, Europe fractured. No longer held together by imperial administration, the continent became a patchwork of Germanic kingdoms: Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Lombards, Franks, each building their own societies atop the ruins of Roman order. But amid the chaos, the Church endured. Rooted in Rome and empowered first by Constantine's Edict of Milan in 313, and later by Theodosius's Edict of Thessalonica in 380, the Christian Church had secured its role as the spiritual glue of a broken continent. As stability gradually returned to regions of post-Roman Europe, Nicene Christianity followed close behind. The Church's missionary efforts expanded outward from Rome, bringing a unified form of the faith to newly emerging societies. Regions like Anglo-Saxon Britain, once steeped in paganism, or Lombard Italy, which had followed Arian Christianity, a sect that questioned the full divinity of Christ, gradually joined the fold of the Latin Church. Over time, political unification in mainland Europe began to mirror the Church's growing cohesion. The Franks, one of the dominant Germanic tribes, rose to prominence and began to consolidate much of the continent. Under rulers like Charlemagne, a vast European kingdom emerged, larger than any seen since the fall of Rome. And though the kingdom would fracture, it would also reassemble under Otto I, who, in 962, was crowned by the Pope as Holy Roman Emperor, forging a powerful alliance between the state and the sanctity of the Church. The Holy Roman Empire may have been a secular polity in structure, but make no mistake, it was deeply Christian. While emperors controlled the politics, finances, and armies, they did so with the blessing of the Church, whose approval sanctified imperial authority. But the Church was no passive partner. It held vast tracts of land across Europe and maintained its own territorial infrastructure. These lands were divided into dioceses, each overseen by a bishop. But here emerged a gray area that would come to define one of the most explosive and dramatic controversies of the Middle Ages. Because of the close church-state relationship, bishops often stood with one foot in each world. Appointed to guide spiritually, they also found themselves deeply involved in secular governance, overseeing land, managing wealth, and even sometimes advising on military affairs. Their political influence often even surpassed that of local nobles. And this raised a fundamental question. Were bishops agents of the church or officers of the state? And more practically, which body had the authority to appoint them? Over the centuries, the process of bishopric appointment, known as investiture, had gradually shifted. In the days of the Roman Empire, bishops were often chosen by those within their diocese. But as imperial authority grew, so too did its control over the church. By the early days of the Holy Roman Empire, when the Church depended heavily on imperial protection, the practice of lay, or secular, investiture was the norm. But many within the Church believed that lay investiture was the root of widespread corruption. Bishops appointed by kings often owed their loyalty to the crown. Simony, or the buying and selling of church offices, became rampant, and with it, moral decay. By the mid-11th century, the Church pushed back. Pope Leo IX condemned both lay investiture and simony, seeing some controversies of his own, but Pope Gregory VII truly lit the powder keg. In 1075, he issued the Dictatus Papae, a declaration that the Pope, and Pope alone, could appoint or depose bishops, depose emperors, and that papal authority superseded any secular ruler. And with that, the Church had crossed the Rubicon, and there was no turning back. Pope Gregory VII had taken a monumental gamble in an attempt to reassert papal authority after centuries of weakness. If successful, it would reshape the power dynamics of Christendom. But if the people rallied behind the emperor, it could shatter the church's authority for generations. And it wouldn't take long for that gamble to face its first trial. Later that year, Emperor Henry IV blatantly defied Gregory's decree by appointing Tedald as Archbishop of Milan, one of the most influential bishoprics in Italy. Gregory had already named his own candidate, Atto, and saw Henry's move as a direct challenge to papal supremacy. Gregory demanded that Henry retract, but Henry doubled down and in January 1076 gathered a council of loyal bishops at the Synod of Worms and did what any good Christian would. He deposed Pope Gregory. To twist the knife, he mockingly referred to him as Hildebrand, his birth name, symbolically stripping him of his sacred office. In response, Pope Gregory did what any good pope would do. He excommunicated Henry. While some loyalists stuck by Henry, the weight of religious conviction and the fear of eternal damnation swayed many to side with the Pope. But excommunication also came with real political consequences, as it essentially released his vassals from their feudal obligations. Henry was effectively dethroned. The German nobility even began electing a new king, only delaying to give him a chance at redemption at an upcoming assembly with the Pope in Augsburg. Henry, however, didn't wait. In early 1077, he made a dramatic journey across the Alps in the dead of winter, known as the Road to Canossa. There, in the snow outside the castle in northern Italy, Henry reportedly stood barefoot and penitent for 3 days before the Pope would grant him an audience. Eventually, Pope Gregory relented. The excommunication was lifted, and Henry was reinstated. At least for the moment. But with that act of absolution, the authority over investiture had been pulled away from the state and placed firmly in the hands of the church. Enjoying this so far? Give us a like and subscribe. It helps more than you know and keeps this kind of content coming. Though the road to Canossa marked the climax of the investiture controversy, it was hardly its resolution. What followed wasn't a return to order, but a shift from a spiritual standoff to a more overtly political feud. Pope Gregory's dramatic excommunication of Henry had set the wheels in motion, and the fallout only intensified the drama. Furious that Henry bypassed their planned council in Augsburg, the German nobility elected Rudolf of Swabia as a rival king, igniting a civil war. Gregory initially tried to stay above the fray, but in 1080 he backed Rudolf, even issuing a second excommunication of Henry. This time, though, the act was widely viewed as political, lacking the spiritual weight of the first. In retaliation, Henry rallied loyal bishops, deposed Gregory, and, keeping to the reforms, had them elect Wilbert of Ravenna as, quote, anti-pope, end quote, Clement III. With momentum on his side, Henry marched into Rome, installed his anti-pope, and forced Gregory into exile, where he died in 1085. Henry emerged victorious from the Civil War, but the controversy was far from over. Canossa had shown that popes could humble emperors, but also that the empire could strike back. The dramatic showdown gave way to decades of lower-stakes wrangling over clerical authority. Not until the Concordat of Worms in 1122 would a formal compromise be reached, but by then the precedent had been set. The medieval church-state relationship had been irreversibly altered. The investiture controversy set the terms for how the world would understand the relationship between religious and secular power. Though Henry IV may have had the last laugh, the precedent was clear. The church had moral authority that even kings had to reckon with. What followed was a golden age of papal power lasting nearly 2 centuries, a dramatic reversal from the years leading up to Canossa when emperors called the shots. In the wake of the East-West Schism just 2 decades earlier, Pope Gregory VII's insistence that the church remain free from secular interference pushed the Western Church even further from its Byzantine counterpart, where emperors often held sway over bishops. That split helped solidify the idea of a spiritually autonomous church, an idea still central to Catholic doctrine and woven into the very DNA of Western political thought, including the U.S. First Amendment. The precedent was so strong that when Henry VIII of England sought to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, he didn't overrule the church. He left. The spiritual authority laid down by Gregory was so entrenched that Henry's only viable option was to break from Rome entirely. Interestingly, because Catherine was Spanish and the church feared alienating Spain, it turned a blind eye as Spain retained secular influence over the church's appointment for centuries, through what became known as the Patronato Real, a privilege only fully relinquished in 1975 with the death of Francisco Franco and the restoration of religious autonomy under King Juan Carlos. In short, the investiture controversy was never about who could appoint a bishop. It posed a much deeper, much more lasting question. Who truly held the power, the sword or the cross? And in many ways, we're still answering it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found this period in history both informative and enlightening. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope you can join us for another video. Thanks for watching.